Welcome back to Interfex Live. We're here with Dina Maines, and we're going to talk about a topic that everybody loves, about somebody coming in and giving you a proctological examination at your facility, better known as an inspection. Okay, so having said all of that, so let's just say I got one coming up. So how do I get prepared, Dina?
I think the most important aspect of getting ready for a regulatory inspection is that it has to start from the very top of your organization. In other words, if your key executives and senior management are not engaged and recognize that an inspection is something that you have to prepare for every day. In other words, it's a state of control, it's a state that you have to maintain your business, and it's not an event that you plan for. You have to maintain that state of readiness to be able to kick off an inspection anytime, any day. So I think that's a key, critical aspect. It's something that needs to be budgeted, it needs to be staffed, it needs to be supported, and it needs to be reported up into senior management for all of the inspections that are occurring, or your mock inspections, or even your internal audits. You have opportunities to report into your executive management, either in a management review situation or in a regular or periodic meeting.
So let me ask you this. So what I'm hearing is most people say, oh my God, I got an inspection, and they run around trying to get it ready in a week or so. So you're saying that this should be part of a business strategy?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's one of the key fundamental processes that you should have in place to be able to effectively run your business.
And just out of curiosity, where does that usually reside in a firm? In a QA, compliance, where?
It depends on the size of the firm, but as long as it's well defined as to what area of the company has the responsibility for managing and conducting an inspection, then you should be okay. But typically I see it in either a quality organization or in a compliance organization. And again, that depends on the size of the business. It's typically got at least 1 to 2 full-time employees that support the initiative, but again, that depends on the size of the company.
All right, so I'm a small firm, CMO, or small startup, and I want to get started. So walk me through it.
I think it's important, like we said, that there are clearly defined roles and responsibilities within the organization for the management of the inspection. You have to have a clearly identified host that may or may not be an executive within the company. It may be somebody that's in charge of your quality or compliance organization. And you want to have that person available to be able to drop at a moment's notice to be able to go in and greet the investigator and get the inspection started. It may not be the most senior person in the organization. It may be your director or manager of quality, or a director or manager of compliance, or even levels above that. But you want that host role well defined, and also in the event that you have multiple investigators, you may want to identify 1 to 2 backup hosts that could help support during an inspection. Then obviously you have your scribes that are in the room during the inspection who are going to be taking all the notes and helping process with the requests. And you've got your runners that run between your front room, where the investigator is, and the back room. Back room is probably the most important part of the inspection. That's where your folks are coordinating all the exhibits, prepping your subject matter experts, and putting all the exhibits together to be brought forward via the runners into your front room. So having those well-defined roles and responsibilities actually help decrease the tension during that first day, which is the most important.
So what's the first day like? I mean, that's got to sets the tone for the whole thing. So the guy or woman walks in, what do you do?
I'd like to call that first day, the first hour, my golden hour. Based on how much preparation I've put into getting ready for the FDA coming in, or any other regulatory authority for that matter, I think that it very clearly reflects as to your state of control in that first hour. If you have things prepared that you can actually present to an investigator when they come in that first hour. Based on the type of inspection, if you're anticipating a pre-approval inspection, a high-level overview of the company is always a good thing, with an org chart, so they know who the executives are, and they'll have a list of who they'll be speaking with over the next several days. An overview of any specific technology is a good idea, and there are other things that you can do to get prepared as far as getting ready for an inspection. You may want to have, if it's a new facility, you may want to have a presentation on all the key and critical qualification activities. If it's a new facility as well, you may want to have an overview on your quality systems, or you may want to have an overview on your validation program. But having those programs prepared will actually slow your inspection down during the first day to be able to get everybody ready for the inspection, and it kind of diffuses the tension. If you have if you're a publicly traded company and you have an annual report, that's a good thing to have available in your toolkit.
So let me ask you this. There's audits, inspections, pre-approvals, responses to field alerts. Are they all handled about the same way?
Let me break it apart a little bit. I think that there are things that you can plan for and things that you can't plan for. Obviously, if you have a pre-approval pending, you can expect that you're going to have an inspection. If you haven't been inspected within the last 2 years. If you've got a good rating with FDA and you've been inspected within the last 2 years, you may not see an inspection for a pre-approval, but I always suggest that you plan for it either way. The next thing you spoke of was field alerts or field actions. That's another situation with which the FDA may come in if you've got an open field alert or other activity or problem with your product, just to follow up on that field action. Again, you can prepare, you can have a copy of the field alert, you can have a copy of your plan in a presentation of these are the activities that we're doing, and update that on a periodic basis so that when they do come in, you actually have a presentation prepared and ready to go to give them that update just like you would in writing.
Must be a lot of the personalities involved. I mean, to me, one of the things I've always found is that, you know, it depends on the inspector, but there must be some ground rules as what they can ask and what you can give them and what the conditions are. Classic example at one of our clients, it was the debate centered around whether the inspector could bring a camera with them. I mean, to me, like, what an inane discussion that turned out to be. But just give me some background. Is there some guidance there?
Well, it's interesting because years ago, photography was not allowed in facilities. But in more recent years, what you're finding with the advent of the iPhone and all the electronic technology, there's more and more discussion within industry and within the FDA about the ability to actually photograph when they're on sites now. So if you've got a policy that says no photography is allowed, obviously you have to follow your policy, and it's all right to request of the investigator to get something in writing to say that they need to photograph, but typically photographs in the past were not allowed. I think it's important that you have to be accommodating of an investigator when they come into your facility. In other words, if they ask you for something that may be a little unusual, you can always ask them, well, why do you need to see this? And it's an unusual request, and it's something that we're not used to normally providing. The example I can give is an internal audit report. If a European investigator comes to your site, they're going to expect to see that audit report. But if it's a domestic investigator, they typically don't see internal audit reports. I think you have to play it by ear. I think they can ask for documented evidence of that internal investigation or internal audit. That could be a memo that's been written to file that says that the audit was conducted on this date, these were the findings, and then they'll follow up with evidence of CAPA follow-up and closure. But to make a long story short, I think that you have to play it by ear with your investigator and really get their tone and mood when they're there.
Is there a difference if a guy is going to, somebody from EMEA is coming, or FDA, or a foreign inspectorate? I mean, any difference in the way you approach this? Or?
Yeah, I think there is a slight difference in the way that the EMA and FDA approach their inspections. The European investigators are all about the manufacturing floor. They want to get out there, they want to see the operators, they want to see how your product is made, they want to see how you handle reprocessing or rework. They're very, very focused on the technology and the equipment and your state of control in the actual manufacturing area. The FDA, their investigations are more document-driven. At least that's what it's been in the past. I think what you'll find, though, moving forward in the future, the FDA is starting to change its focus, and what I'm seeing is that investigations are going on now, and they're got a lot of trainees at FDA, so that you're getting 2 and 3 trainees coming in with a field investigator now. And that's because they're building up a cadre within FDA that are specifically focused around particular dosage forms or technologies right now. So they're definitely trying to up their technical base within FDA.
Well, that's good news. I got to tell you, the biggest fear I have is an investigator that doesn't know what they're doing, because I think the biggest problem I have is a question that's asked out of ignorance. What that means is then I don't know, it's hard to answer it, and you wind up usually giving the wrong answer, and that increases the chance of a fishing expedition.
Well, I think that brings to the point that you have to have a really good host during an inspection that can manage the investigators if they're not quite sure what they're doing. You're going to have to listen very carefully to the questions that they're asking. If an investigator isn't knowledgeable in a key area, they will start asking open-ended questions instead of specific questions. So you as a host can actually help manage that investigator by leading them into discussions or questions that they may be trying to ask and don't know how to ask it. So I think that's another key piece of the host being able to manage that inspection.
So whatever happened to the inspector that would come in and say, okay, walk me through the process front to back with FDA? It seems that that's gone by the wayside.
I always have it, part of my opening presentation is a process schematic and an overall facilities diagram to be able to walk them through the facility on the tour and to be able to take them down through the process, again, for a PAI, or if you've got a unique or different technology, I think it's really important that you be able to walk that person through. So, yeah, I think schematics, diagrams, graphics are always good to have available in those opening presentations so that, again, when the investigator comes in, you're being transparent with them, they know that you're vesting in them, you're there to help them as much as they're here to help us, right? They're public health officials.
So it sounds to me like first impressions are key. So based on our previous conversation, so what should I have at my fingertips? You know, what should I be ready? What do I have to have in that room?
Okay, that's a good question. I always speak of a toolkit, and that's a box. And in that box are all the markers, pens, dry erase boards, flip charts, all the logistics that go into managing the inspection. It's the hardware. If you're going to be using paper-based request slips, which I've done in the past that are pre-numbered so we don't lose any requests, that's a good thing. And I'll get into inspection management in a little bit about IMing because I've got some opinions about that. But it also is part of the Investigator Toolkit. If you have an annual report, keep that updated in the box, one for the front room, one for the back room. In addition to that, you also want to have available at a moment's notice water, bottled water in the box so that you have it available right from the get-go. It's always a nice thing to be able to be courteous and offer someone a bottle of water. But the second piece that I wanted to speak to, that's probably one of the most important ones that I wanted you folks to know, is be careful of lists. On a monthly basis, you folks should be preparing lists out of your electronic systems. The FDA always looks at what goes wrong, not at what runs well, unfortunately. So they're always looking at your exception or event management and reporting. So I think it's really important for you to, on a monthly basis, if you're using especially electronic solutions, that you build a query and you run that query every month for deviations, complaints, CAPAs, or any other list that you may generate during an inspection, that you test it, you run it, because inevitably I've seen queries that if you don't repeat it the exact same way, I've seen the exact same list come in on 2 different days with different content. And that never goes well during an inspection. So again, also, in reviewing those lists on the atypical events or the things that go wrong, if you review those lists on a monthly basis, you're not going to get flustered when the FDA starts asking you questions because you've reviewed those events internally with your team and also with your management to be able to say, look, here's our high-risk events, here are our low-risk events. If somebody wants to talk about this, who are we going to send into the room? So you keep that active dialogue going up with your management team as part of inspection readiness.
So these lists are CAPAs, OOS,
Yes.
TOS? What?
Yeah, exactly. Anything that goes wrong and anything that you may capture in an electronic system. It could be calibrations. If you've got calibrations that are performed on a periodic basis, hey, maintenance, send me your list. They're going to hate you after a while, but you're going to look for your validation team, send me your list. Your laboratory controls group, send me your list of OOS or OOTs. Quality, send me your list of deviations and kappas. You do that on a monthly basis, and as part of this activity of inspection readiness with this team, reviewing these lists with those operating areas makes the whole organization aware of what some of the issues are, and it just gets them more comfortable in speaking to them so that when somebody does show up at your door, you've got that information down pat.
Sounds like a lot of lists to me.
It is.
Wow. Okay. So, but obviously a list is great, but who interprets the list for them?
Again, the inspection team, along with the management of the company. Obviously, these things have to be reviewed and approved by the appropriate levels within the business organization. And hopefully within your program, if you've got something very, very significant that's happened, it has been reported up via some type of periodic management review within your organization for those investigations or those deviations or those problems that have occurred that have potential for patient impact. So, I mean, really, those are the ones that you want to talk about all the way up to your upper levels of management.
So let me see if I got this straight. I mean, so far we're talking about the front end team, the compliance people, they're hosting the FDA, they're looking at the lists. So when does the guys who actually manufacture the product, develop the product, get involved in this? Or the you follow me? When do you pull these kind of folks in?
Well, those are what you're calling your SMEs, right? Your subject matter experts. And you have to identify before the agency comes in who your SMEs are going to be and who's going to speak to what. I've actually had circumstances where I had a technical person that was the process expert on a particular process we were bringing in-house with a new technology, but he was the worst SME that we could have identified because he didn't know when to stop speaking, and he would volunteer a lot more information other than what was just asked. Yeah, you're shaking your head. You've had that happen, right? The guy that just doesn't know when to stop talking. Or I've run into a situation where someone was so arrogant that they came across as being condescending with a junior investigator. And that's never a good situation. So I think it's very important that you identify up front who your subject matter experts are going to be during your inspections. I mean, let's face it, some of us are just more composed than others. I actually had a junior analyst at one point in time that I absolutely couldn't bring into the inspection room because every time we looked at her, she broke out in tears. She was afraid she was going to make a mistake, and she didn't want to lose her, she was afraid she would lose her job. And I kept telling her, no, this is fine. They're people, they have children, they have lives, they have pets, they're not here to bite you, they're not here to get mad at you. Just speak openly and honestly. But it got to the point where she just, every time, she would just look at the floor and break out crying. So I had to actually talk to the investigator and say, I know you wanted to see Analyst X to confirm her training, but she's so afraid that she's crying out in the hallway at this point. Would you just be willing to step out of the room for a moment and just assure her that everything is okay? So we got and managed through it. But you don't want surprises like that. That's a bit of a challenge during an inspection. So the more practice that you have, the better off you'll be.
So this mental breakdown was able to be identified before this happened, or just out of curiosity?
Well, unfortunately, no, on my end, but I learned an invaluable lesson, and that is to identify your subject matter experts, even down to the junior analyst level early. There are people who are just more composed when it comes to speaking in front of the investigators.
So, out of curiosity, so having the investigator step out on a one-to-one basis and talk to her, that diffused the situation?
Yeah, she was more comfortable. She didn't want to go into the room.
Now, how was the investigator with that?
Very accommodating. She was very, very, very good. So I think that obviously people are nervous when they're speaking to the investigators. And I was very fortunate. We had built up a rapport early on in the inspection. And, you know, I was just totally honest with her. I said, look, I've got an analyst who's just scared to death, and she's afraid to come in. And I said, if we can pull you aside in a nice, quiet space, you can just assure her that everything will be fine.
Wow. Okay.
No,
so how do you, I don't know about the rap, to me it's, so what do you do? Some kind of mental profiling on these folks or what? Well, how do you identify the ones who are going to break down on you?
Practice. practice and more practice. You know that you're going to have inspections. So as part of the staffing and roles of that inspection team or that compliance team, whatever you want to call it, at least once or twice a year, you should practice. You should also take the opportunity of other investigations that come in. The DEA may come in for controlled substances, or you may have a client come in on an audit. Take those opportunities and run them as you would any other regulatory inspection. Another recommendation I have is your internal audit program. Most times, and I'm guilty of this too, my internal auditor has come in, they come in a room, they sit by themselves, they look at the SOPs, and we send in one person at a time. And they write up their report, and we fight the report, and we issue it. I've now learned that that's a missed opportunity to actually run it as an audit. Run it formally. Work that team muscle out, even if it's an internal audit. Report into management at the end of the day with a daily wrap-up, even on an internal audit. Have a wrap-up meeting at the end of that internal audit with the management team. The more practice that you have, the better off you'll be. And the other thing that I wanted to recommend as well is that no matter how many audits you have, no matter how many internal audits are performed or external audits are performed by clients or other regulators, I think it's important to understand that an audit is just an audit. No one finds everything. I once went into a company where after 12 years of no observations, the company went directly into a warning letter. And the president asked me, he said, "How did we get here?" And the answer was, "You were drinking your own wine." And he said, "What's that?" I said, "Just because things were going along well and you thought everything was okay, you didn't absolutely know everything was okay because you had such basic fundamental GMP violations that the FDA took them not through the 483, they took them directly into a warning letter because their violations were that basic and that egregious in that particular facility." So again, you can't rely on your inspection history, you can't rely on your past history. You have to be prospective in your thinking. And I always recommend the use of not only internal resources for auditing, but also going to the outside, getting those external resources, because every individual is different, every auditor is different. Even though they may be auditing the same systems and controls, they may be using a different approach or a different audit technique. And in doing this, you're able to actually get a deeper dive on your systems and controls.
Well, I guess they were drinking the Kool-Aid for sure on that one. But let me, you know, I mean, I think the point that I've always found interesting on that is, you know, how do you shake them out of that mode? I mean, obviously they didn't even know it, you know, so that's a problem.
Well, that's why like I said, I strongly recommend having an independent set of auditors come in on a period basis. I don't know any company out there that doesn't have their financial controls audited on an annual basis. And if you treated your quality systems and controls with the same level of intensity as you do your financial controls, and anybody that's worked with a company that's under consent decree and had to pay fines knows that your quality controls can be every bit as material to your business, and some cases even more costly than your financial controls. So if you're willing to go to get an outside auditor in for your books, why don't you go to the outside on a period basis and get an independent auditor to come in and audit your systems? Again, everybody looks at things differently. And the more people that look at your systems and controls with different sets of eyes, the better off and more robust your programs are going to be.
So I think we got a pretty good idea what's happening in the front end, including the drama there with the, but let me ask you this. So, you know, again, I'm a techie myself, so to me, I'm always wondering, okay, so when are we going to get to the heart of the matter here? So what's going on in the background?
Okay, obviously part of your inspection team are your backroom folks as well. There's a backroom coordinator, which is the key person at the doorway. We've actually had to close the door on certain occasions to stop people from coming in. It's almost like bees to honey during an inspection. People like to congregate to the back room. So you need to have an identified backroom coordinator that's going to take all the requests from the front room and have a team of people that are going to be assembling those requests. You never want a document to go into the front room unless that document has been reviewed, because how many times do you have reports that have post-it notes that are left from your validations, or maintenance records that weren't checked? I mean, they see it when you actually have missed something and you check it and you approve it before it goes in the room on the same day, and they'll probably dig it a little bit further, but it's much better to correct it before it goes into the room rather than to send in something that hasn't been corrected. But the back room will have your backroom coordinator. They'll probably have a couple of people or 3 people taking those requests and reaching out to the various departments and the SMEs. They'll call the SMEs into the room, and I think it's really important because senior management is the worst SME out there in that they tend to go right into the inspection room without going into the readiness room to make sure that they get briefed on exactly what the conversation has been going on in the room, so they go in there with the right context. So the coordinator makes sure that they reach out to the leadership and the management to make sure that everybody comes in through that back room before they go into the front room. And also, they're going to gate to make sure that your SMEs don't go into the front room with a document that they've pulled out of their desk. I've seen this with R&D folks, that sometimes they will have a report that they've pulled out of their desk that may not be the official report that's been signed. It's fine for them to bring the report, but they've got to get the one that's archived in document control that has the correct approvals on it. So the gatekeeper in the back room, that backroom coordinator, is actually probably the most important person in the inspection because they're managing those exhibits that are going in. A tip that we've employed in the past is use colored folders if you've got multiple investigators, so that way when you go into the room, you'll immediately know what investigator the requests are to be. Make sure you hand them to the host so they see what requests are being filled. And then it also gives you a real quick visual in the room by the number of file folders piled up in front of each of the investigators as to how quickly they're working and how quickly they're getting through their exhibits. So it kind of gives you an idea on how to pace each of those individuals with that real quick visual.
Let's talk about the pacing for a minute. So the guy asked for validation report X for some product. So obviously there's going to be some time. Let's assume that let's assume it's a development report. Maybe it's something a little more obscure, or God forbid it's a notebook. All right. So what happens in the meantime? Do we turn on elevator music, or what do we do?
It'd be nice if we could sometimes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, how do you get over that one?
Well, it is a reality, and the investigators are going to understand and expect that there may be delays in getting some of their documentation, particularly if they're older documents that may have been archived. A lot of companies use off-site archival facilities, and if a document is archived, is off-site, it's okay to say to the investigator, we'll get you that report, but it's going to take us 3 hours, 4 hours a day, because it is archived off-site. If, per se, they're talking about a validation report and you don't have the validation report, you can just say, we don't have it here on site, we're going to have to get it for you. Is there something else you'd like to move on to?
What about, let's just talk about that for a minute, you know, and it's more about investigator and front room management. So silence is golden, or?
Oh, silence is a void that we want to fill, right? Whenever anyone asks a question of us, we always want to answer it. That's our basic human instinct. The investigators are actually trained to use what I would call a pregnant pause. And by that, it's that long pause in a conversation or a question that we're going to naturally want to fill, right? In other words, they'll ask you a question and then they'll be silent for a minute. And you're going to get very twitchy and uncomfortable in your seat, and you're going to think that something's wrong. So you're automatically going to start wanting to elaborate or add additional dialogue. Don't be afraid of that pause in the conversation to sit back and wait for the investigator to ask you another question. They're going to try to get you to elaborate. So if they've asked a question, you've answered that question, and it's silence, it's okay just to sit there patiently. I know it's hard, but don't volunteer answering additional information other than the question that was asked.
So that gets back to training people before they walk in the door.
Absolutely. I can't tell you how much practice means. The first hour, those first couple of minutes in the door, if you're prepared and geared up and you seamlessly flow into an inspection. And if you've done a lot of training, it comes off almost immediately with the investigator, hey, these guys are in pretty good shape. They know their business. They're in a state of control. And it also calms your organization down, which is really, really important. And let me speak to one thing about calming the organization down. The reason that that's so important is the entire organization will feed off of the energy that's coming out of the investigation room and the people in the inspection. They will see you at lunchtime, and if you're a host, they will ask you your questions like, how's it going, what's going on? And it's really important for the investigation team to really have a positive attitude during the inspection of, it's okay, they're asking what they should be asking, we're giving them what we should be giving them. It's, you know, they may find a little problem here or there, but that's going to happen. So all I'm saying is that your employees feed off of the way you respond and the way you handle yourself during an inspection. You have to be careful to calm the organization down. They have to be trained about conversations in the hallway because walls are very thin. And you also have to be aware that the investigators are people who live in the towns that you live in. I actually was talking with my sister in the line at Home Depot one day, and I happened to live near the Parsippany District Office. And my sister asked me, so how's your inspection going? And I turned around in line, and it was the investigator that was on site. So you never know who's going to be online behind you in the Home Depot, or who may know somebody who has a cousin who knows someone else. You really want to control the tension, the atmosphere during the inspection. The calmer you are, the calmer everybody else is going to be.
All right, so take a look around at Home Depot when you're there during an inspection too. So, but let me ask you this one. Some of the tips on handling these investigators, I mean, they must range from nice to adversarial to stupid to whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah, how do you do the triage on the questions?
Okay.
What's the deal?
There's certain fundamental do's and don'ts during an inspection. Some of the fundamental do's are you have to be trustworthy. You have to be truthful. You have to be respectful. You have to answer the question, but only the question asked. And most importantly, if you are not the subject matter expert on that particular question or that area, then just say, I'm not the subject matter expert. I will go get someone for you to speak to that question. It's okay to excuse yourself from the room, or if you're not sure about how to answer a troublesome question, it's okay to say, I need to take a break, I'll be right back. Go in the back room, you can pull the host out, you can regroup with your management about how to handle a tricky question. It's okay to take a break during the inspection. You have to be careful of questions that may not be appropriate. And this rarely happens, but someone may say, how do you like working here? You're going to want to turn that around and say, well, what specifically would you like me to tell you? And then the open-ended questions, obviously, you want to avoid, like, how would you do X? You never speak to something that's speculative. You want to speak to facts. And what's really important is, whenever possible, speak to a document. And by that I mean, if you have an SOP around a particular activity or system, make sure you've reviewed that SOP before you go into the room. And if there's a section that calls out what you would do in a certain situation in that document, you want to be able to say, you know, that's in my SOP. Instead of speaking to it, let's take a look at the section in the procedure. Because many times they'll go across and ask a question of different people, and they want to see how they answer it the same way. So if you've got it in an SOP, and you always speak to your document, that way you'll always answer the question the same way. So that's a really important do. Like I said, the don'ts, don't speculate. Don't use terms like typically or never or sometimes. We'll do X, because that allows for variability, and you don't want to have a variable conversation. Excuse me.
Let's bring it around. I mean, we've heard about the do's, the don'ts, who's in the front, who's in the back. So what's the most important thing as a takeaway we want to plan for as a team?
Again, make sure that you know that this has got to be a living, breathing system within your company. So the most important takeaway is practice, practice, practice. be ready every day, and I strongly recommend that independent assessment on a regular basis.
Just as a background, I've sat through these with Dina. So what she has done is, it's true. We had the privilege of working for a previous company. And usually these things turn into like a real fire drill. So at the time, this was back when they'd show up and it was a dog and pony show. So she brought systemization to it for us at that juncture. So this is what she says is true. So that about wraps it up here for our part on audits and preparation here at Interfex Live. I want to thank you for your attendance. That's it.